Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. I am Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning 5 and Change. This podcast covers the national champions. Yes, it's Wednesday and I'm back. Those of you who haven't caught on yet, Dave Biddle is not here this week. He has chosen to follow his beloved Cincinnati Reds to Arizona for spring training. So hopefully he'll come back with some great stories about that. Still going to have the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell, on the show today. We got a lot to talk about. Bax is fired up about the new playoff system that could be coming in. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the NFL Combine, which starts this week. Our guys are probably already there or in transit, and we will dive deep on that. But first, Pat Murphy would not be happy if I did not read the ad today, because it is joy mode. You know what that is. Say goodbye to weakness in the bedroom with Joy Mode's Sexual Performance Booster. All natural supplement designed to enhance your performance. It isn't just about better sex, Daily use supports healthier blood vessels, boosts heart health, and enhances your athletic performance. Expertly formulated and backed by science, it's proven to improve your function by 50% in just 60 days. If you're looking to take your game to the next level, and we know you are, visit tryjoymode.com, tryjoymode.com, and use code Bucknuts at checkout for 20% off single purchases and 30% off subscription orders. That's tryjoymode.com and use code Bucknuts for 30% off subscription orders. All right. One guy who never comes at a discount, and that is the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Bax, Dave is not here. He is likely headed to Arizona. He's in Arizona watching the Reds play. He did not. The snow actually went away, and we had nice weather yesterday, which is a little bit of a challenge. But I will try and be gentle with you, as we have not done this in a while. I did have Mark Neal on the show Monday to use the Wayback Machine. You and Mark had a nice little history there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And while our boy Dave is down in Arizona, by the way, he's giving us gambling advice on the Reds too, so I think he's having plenty of fun. So
I'm sure that won't be biased towards the Reds at all.
Yeah, he picked the over on the season for wins, so you were definitely correct. Not biased whatsoever.
That's so alarming. That's really alarming, but great for Dave. I think everything's coming up roses. You win the championship, that's probably the year you want to go visit the Reds and try and spread some of that Buckeye DNA out there. But we shall see. All right, Bax. Big week for your Buckeyes who have just flown the coop. It is the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. 15 Buckeyes slated to attend. That's the most of any team. And then, as everybody knows, they're going to be making a run at the drafted record. I think it's 16. Regardless, you've got guys of all shapes and sizes and guys predicted to go in about every round. What's interesting is there's so many guys going as I go through this now. There have been days in the past that Combine basically runs Thursday through Sunday, 4-day event. There have been times in the past where you haven't maybe had a Buckeye to pull for on a certain day. That's not going to happen this time. Thursday, defensive line and linebackers. Friday, defensive backs and tight ends. Saturday, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs. And then Sunday, offensive linemen. There will be a theme at this Combine, and it will be the Buckeyes. And I think a lot of it's going to be the fact that how many of them improved their stock during the playoff, and that's going to keep getting repeated. I love the Combine because it's kind of like tangential recruiting. Every guy who comes to Ohio State expects to be there. Every single guy who comes to Ohio State expects to be there. I cannot talk about this enough. We were talking about this yesterday on the show. your guys care more about the combine than they do about when they're in high school. They care more about how you guys do at the combine than beating Michigan. Okay, this is their future. This is how they get paid. So that's my preamble. Take it and run with it. Who could thrive this week? What are your expectations for the combine? Do you think it's a big PR show for the Buckeyes? Take it and run with it.
Well, I think you're right. First of all, with there being 15 Buckeyes there, it's going to be all Ohio State all the time. But I think something that's going to be really important to note here is that I'm interested to see who's going to officially work out. We have a couple guys that have been injured too. Josh Simmons' recovery is going to be a big topic because if these NFL teams feel confident that Simmons' recovery is on or ahead of track, his stock is going to go up. I mean, he was very much a middle first-round pick at the time of his knee injury against Oregon. So if they feel like he's recovering to a point that they think he's going to be ready for the season, you're going to see him maybe be the first tackle off the board, second tackle off the board, something in that range. If they think it's a slower recovery, then Simmons might fall a little bit in the draft. So that's going to be one of the interesting things. The second thing I think I'm really interested in seeing here is I am secretly expecting Will Howard to be a higher pick than almost everybody but Will Howard's mom. And the reason for that is that I think these teams are going to fall in love with him when they sit down and talk to him. We saw it over the years. He kind of blossomed into a leader for Ohio State. All the throws are there. All the physical attributes are there. I think these NFL teams, somebody's going to sit down and look at him and go, ooh, there's a lot to like here. And quarterbacks are always drafted higher than you think they should be. I think Will Howard's going to come out of this combine with the people talking about the interview process raving about him. So that's my second prediction. Third thing, I am going to be absolutely fascinated to see how Tyleik Williams tests, right? Because he's a guy that we've always talked about as being maybe that he's that super athletic, twitchy D tackle that carries the weight, right? The back in the day, the message board on the front row, they would call them the floppy belly SEC D tackles, right? Where they're unbelievable athletes but carry more weight than you should be able to be that kind of athlete. I think Tyleik's testing is going to be one of the more watched Buckeyes throughout the entire weekend because if he tests in a freakish way, that's going to help propel him upwards as well. I think that there's going to be a lot of intrigue around these guys here, but he's the one I'm most excited to see test outside of the classic 40-yard dash that everybody wants to watch for everyone.
What do you make of the I don't know if they're going to label it as a competition, but we talked about this yesterday. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson both will be there. I think, I hope they both run the 40. You made a really good point about who's going to test. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depends when you get picked, I guess. Guys don't do everything they used to do at the combine. Usually, even the top guys used to go there and at least run. The quarterbacks would at least throw. Like CJ Stroud at least went and threw. I don't think you're going to see – you're already hearing about Sanders not working out, Abdul Carter not working out, which makes sense if you're in the top 5. But a guy like Travion Henderson, I don't know what he could run in the 40. But Quinshon Judkins, if he gets under 4.5 in the 40, I think he could rock up the boards a little bit. Where do you stand on those two? If your team needed a running back and you were going to use a pick, where would you lean?
Well, I have said this. I think Trey's the faster of the two. I think he'll probably test a little quicker in the 40. I also think Q is maybe the more physical runner. So if you're picking in the NFL today, you've probably already got one or two tailbacks, right? So what do you need? Do you need the home run hitter? Do you want the guy you think's better catching the ball in the backfield, which is Trey? Or do you want the guy that you know is the hammer to go with your already lightning complement? They're a really good tandem. Both of them are more than just a thunder or a lightning back, right? They're good special athletes, but I think that's a matter of need right now with the two of them. But you're right. We just talked about how fast does Q run the 40. If Q's at 4.48, Q's through the roof, right? I think Trey has probably less upside in terms of testing stuff here at the combine because I think people expect him to be faster, right? Whereas I think if Q is that extra gear, then I think, that helps him more. Whereas I think if Trey runs a 4.5, people are going to be like, I thought he was faster than that, right? So that'll be interesting to watch too, because I think they probably have different testing expectations in my view.
if he runs a 4.5, I'm going to assume he pulled his hamstring at the 30-yard mark. There's no way David Henderson runs a 4.5. It's going to be interesting also because I think that sometimes I don't know if it's luck or just evolution works in your factor, but the idea of tandem running backs, Ohio State popularized it for college ball, but I think Jahmyr Gibbs getting picked where he did and playing the way he has for Detroit as not really an every down guy had definitely helped the Travion Henderson case because I think there was we're going through a cycle here where running backs were devalued. Now you're hearing they're being more valued now because of the way Saquon Barkley and like Derrick Henry performed this past year. But I'm very interested to see where Henderson goes. They're all over the map on him. I've told Dave this and the other guys. I follow a draft show that's out of Dallas, which is interesting because they don't know anything about Ohio State, really. The first time they really see the guys on tape is the first time they really bite into them. So they're not kind of saddled by the previous knowledge that all of us have. So we kind of get an honest view of it. And I knew my guy was on point when he was asked about Judkins and Henderson. He's like, I just want to draft them both. They're the perfect combination. They go together so beautifully. And it showed me he knew what he's talking about. So other guys I'm looking forward to thrive. I'll tell you a guy who's going to get a ton of kudos. And I think as we get closer and closer to the draft, the idea of being a guaranteed pick is a stretch, but a guy who has very little bust potential, Donovan Jackson. Your thoughts on him and maybe put in context what he did for the team. But to me, he's a guy who, out of necessity, kind of improved his stock throughout the year.
D-Jack is one of the two safest picks on this entire Ohio State draft class. And I think that if you're an NFL team, you look at him and you say, he's probably a very good guard. But, hey, there's a lot of NFL teams that have terrible tackle play. Pittsburgh, you could easily have him pop out to play right tackle for one of these teams as well and be a really good tackle. We saw it this year. I mean, he had to essentially play left tackle out of nowhere. I mean, and stepping into that role that late into his college career, having never played it and then playing at the level he did, literally the only guy he struggled with was Abdul Carter, who might be the number one pick in the whole draft. And that was his first game. I'd like to have seen how he did maybe like 5-6 games.
Seriously.
In, right?
Talk about baptism by fire. The only more distinct baptism by fire ever. There's a trivia question in there for you. You can work on that. Who had a worse baptism by fire in their first start?
I know that one. I know that one. Taylor Decker against Khalil Mack.
Correct. Taylor Decker started his first game at right tackle versus the University at Buffalo. Why they call it that, I don't know. And it was against Khalil Mack. And to this day, the single best defensive performance I've seen against the Buckeyes by one human being. And his NFL career was completely predictable. We digressed. Go ahead.
Well, that Taylor Decker game was hilarious, too, because I remember afterwards, we're all like, oh, my God, we thought he was good. Some Mac dude just ate his lunch. And then the rest of the year, he was so good. Again. He was a future first-round pick. It just was you played against Khalil freaking Mack. So that was sort of similar to what Jackson did, I guess, back to the present Buckeyes, right? Because that was 10 years ago now, but maybe longer. But at this point, Abdul Carter's awesome. Abdul Carter's going to be a surefire NFL talented impact player. And after the first game, Jackson didn't see anybody maybe quite that good, but I'd really be interested to see how he did if he went against him again. Jackson is the safest pick in all likelihood, other than if you draft Jack Sawyer in the second round. Because I think Sawyer. No, Egbuka, I think, needs to land in the right spot. Right?
Really? Why is that? Expand on that.
Because if you put him in one of those places that doesn't have great QB play, and he doesn't have another guy that stretches the field with him, if he goes to a place where he's immediately the number one guy, let's say Pittsburgh drafts him and then George Pickens gets traded, the teams are going to bracket Egbuka to the point that, and by the way, who the hell's throwing the football there to him? He's going to have struggle getting the targets that he needs, right? Whereas if Egbuka gets picked by, let's say he falls to KC or something, he's immediately the number one fantasy wide receiver in all of, rookie class. There's a lot of places where like Buka goes, and there's, he's the second guy with a deep threat with him out there, and he's able to run his route patterns and everything that he does so well in the mid ranges. And he has a quarterback that can find him. He could absolutely thrive. But if he goes to say he goes to Pittsburgh and they keep Pickens even, and they bring in Matthew Stafford, okay, I'm more interested in how he'll do there, right? But the Egbuka, I think there's more external factors where I think anybody takes Jack Sawyer as a second-round pick, they're going to get a rock-solid guy for 5-6 years. And that's why I think Sawyer is a safer pick.
I'll tell you this. If that scenario takes place, if the Pittsburgh Steelers re-sign George Pickens and they acquire Matthew Stafford, Emeka Egbuka should be your number one pick in fantasy if you are in any kind of rookie keeper league. Go look at what Cooper Kupp did with him. Go look at what some
Puka
Nacua does with him. And George Pickens, my guess is his timing's going to take some work. He'll get deep on you, but in terms of consistency, I don't think that's necessarily George's calling card. Egbuka will be a 85, 90 reception guy as a rookie if that happens. Personally, I kind of like to see that. Get Stafford out
as a Steelers fan, I would too.
Get Stafford out of the NFC too. Anyway, that's always good. I think Emeka is going to get picked higher than people think. I really do.
Yeah,
I think you're looking at a draft as we're going to turn the page. You're looking at a draft where it's not a star-laden draft at the top, and there are not a bunch of quarterbacks. So you're not like Abdul Carter is a nice player. He's not, to me, the Myles Garrett type defensive end you sometimes have at the top that you're willing to give up multiple picks for. Even the top five, I don't think Travis Hunter, he's a really nice player. Is he a life-changing player for your franchise? Is there a quarterback that's really going to turn things around? I heard someone say it's a starters draft, not a star draft. That makes sense to me. All the more reason to highlight your Buckeyes, who are true winners. And keep this in mind in terms of coverage. The NFL Network is a very nationally based deal. They want to talk about stuff that everybody knows, and they know everybody knows about the Buckeyes. So all your little feature vignettes and your little aside interviews, they're going to pre-roll a bunch of Buckeyes on there. So you're going to be able to enjoy that. I'm sure there'll be an interview with JT and Jack sitting side by side, and you'll get the Emeka interview asking about Marvin Harrison and filling shoes and stuff. So let me read our next ad here because you probably worked up an appetite, and that means Factor meals. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor will help you. Chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy, dietitian approved, and this is key, ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes. So you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. 40 options across 8 dietary preferences. Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. I am telling you, Factor has figured out the matrix to cook chicken. My kids will not eat TV dinner chicken. They somehow will eat the Factor chicken. First time I gave it to them, didn't even tell them it was a TV dinner. You got to go with the duck blind test if you want to pull it off. It worked. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that cannot be beat. If you look at the scroll there. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Factor Podcast. And if you use the code Factor Podcast, 50% off plus free shipping. Factor Podcast, factormeals.com, 50% off plus free shipping. All right, backs. Let's talk about the future of college football. Now,
oh boy.
For as far as we go, much like every time they discuss the expansion, they harken back to a young Cardale Jones leading Ohio State to a glorious title. And when they talk about the first college football playoff and what might end up being the hardest road ever, think about this for a second. If they change this, they're not going to make it harder on the top seeds. What might be the hardest road ever was won by your Buckeyes. They always have that. Now, where we go from here, if anyone says they know, they be lying. Everyone has a vibe on it. I'm of the mind that I don't get as fired up about this as some, just because every plan we come up with ends up with Ohio State looking pretty darn good. But, Bax, you are a man of the people, and that's not just Bucknuts. You are a college football lover and a big vibe on the future of the sport. Your thoughts on expansion, where it's going, where it should go, the effects, yada, yada. Take it and run with it.
Well, right now what we're talking about is that the Big Ten and SEC a year or two ago negotiated into the contract that they have the right to essentially change it at will. That was something that the other groups sort of agreed upon because they knew the power imbalance that was coming with the Big Ten rating the Pac-12 and the Big 12 of their top brand name products. So we're essentially looking at a future right now, if people haven't paid attention, where both leagues are trying to have a guaranteed 4 teams in the playoff every year. They're talking about expanding to 14. And they're also talking about taking the first round buys away from people. Essentially saying there's no need for a first round bye. We want just the top 4 overall to get through, which Notre Dame, I'm sure, will certainly love. And all that's fine and dandy. But what we're doing here is we're getting real close. To me, this is the next major step before you see the Big Ten and SEC essentially split off as the AFC and NFC of professional college football. This is where the NCAA essentially goes completely out of the mix. And it's kind of hard, I think, for the casual fan to wrap their head around the fact that you have 135 or whatever teams we do now at Division I. And, less than 40 teams are going to control more than approximately half to 2/3 of the entrance into the field. You're getting kind of narrowed down from a national championship to a league championship at that point. So we're doing away with championship games is now part of the conversation. The 4 and 5 seeds in the leagues are going to try to play in for that last guaranteed spot. You're going to minimize the opportunities that some of these other teams have. And right now it's, I think, a point in time where the Big 12, the ACC are kind of at historical lows. Clemson's not the power it once was. Florida State's not the power it once was. I think we're moving here rapidly towards a college football world. And again, it's a world where Ohio State's going to thrive, Dan, but we're not really the ones that I think are the concern. Any playoff structure, the more opportunities Ohio State gets, the better. In fact, if anything, I thought Ohio State outside of Penn State was the most screwed by the 14 playoffs because they probably should have been in more. And it was kind of forcing in.
Year.
Yeah, no, this year, this structure is perfect for Ohio State. The old playoff structure, Ohio State didn't get in enough, right? They brought in teams that, maybe had an argument, but probably weren't better than Ohio State in a lot of years. And so this works out perfectly for Ohio State because they're always one of the top handful of teams, and they'll just play their way through or not. And we saw it this year. They played their way through, even though they had not 1 but 2 losses. In past years, this would never have been possible. So the big question we're looking at here is how much longer is it until the Big Ten and the SEC and probably pull Notre Dame and 1 or 2 other teams just split off completely? And instead of a Big Ten championship and an SEC championship, it's like the AFC and the NFC winners before you get into the national championship game or something to that effect. That's what we're going to be realistically looking at going forward.
This thing has gotten really bizarre to me, I have to say. Every time we discuss this and we talk about the Big Ten and the SEC like breaking off and getting 4 while the Big 12 gets 2 and kind of thing, when did this happen? I really don't understand why this makes no sense. You make a really good point. We are headed for a 2-tiered sport. We're headed for a different division. That's what I'm seeing here. And I guess that doesn't matter in the grand scheme because it wasn't like Purdue was a big time threat to win the national championship. No offense to Purdue. So I don't think a team outside the 40 that you mentioned ever had a threat to win. And I guess there's the romantic idea of like the NCAA tournament. But the idea that nothing works in cycles anymore, there's no chance the Big 12 can get better than the Big 10 ever again. We've just decided that. Isn't that kind of weird? I mean, don't you find that we've locked things in? Don't you find we've locked things in stone a little too much?
That's the issue I have with it, actually. Look at the ACC teams that wouldn't be included in the Super League, right? Miami, they've won 5 national championships. Florida State, right? Clemson. Georgia Tech won a national championship in my lifetime, by the way.
I remember it.
We can keep talking about all these different schools. I mean, Kansas State in the late 90s and early 2000s spent 6-7 years as one of the absolute apex predators of the college football sporting. And you can talk more about some of these other programs that are, really up and coming groups. I mean, people are moving to Texas, people are moving to Florida. The recruiting that you get in the South only continues to grow as America moves to some of these states. That's just natural. And we're looking at, eliminating these guys completely from any sort of realistic opportunity when we get to that Super League. It's going to make it really tough. And I think that's where it's going to go because, it's like they said in Spaceballs. They have the sequel. It's Spaceballs 2, The Pursuit of More Money. That's what this is. College Football Playoff 3, The Pursuit of Even More Money. And by the way, the driver on all of this is there's a lawsuit that the NCAA has settled out for billions in player retroactive compensation and actually compensating players going forward. So these schools are trying to grab way more money so that they can keep their current standard in place of how their coaches are compensated, how their facilities are upgraded. And that's the problem with it. And this reminds me of in Europe about a year, 2, 3, 4 years ago. Europe has the 5 big countries that have their leagues, and they all play their little Champions League. It's the equivalent of like the conferences in the college football playoff.
You're talking European football now, Bax, I assume.
And here's what happened. The big clubs, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Texases of the world had a plan that they were going to have their Super League, and it would be the best teams, the most money, and they were going to leave their country leagues behind and blow up the Champions League, right? Just like going this way would. And the fan outcry was so intense and enormous immediately from not just fans of other teams, but fans of the superpowers because they thought that they were blowing up the sport. And I feel like that right now. And that's a great point. Buck Rational says a lot of Big Ten SEC people are against this plan. And I am too, because you're correct. College football is the most cyclical sport I can think of. Right, the highs are very high and the lows are very low for a lot of people, a lot of places. Ohio State's like literally the only recession.
I was just going to say that. I love making that point, but you're right. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupt you.
No, go. That's the truth. Pick any team. Go back through the last few national champions. Right, yeah, like Ohio State has been in a very strange position where they've almost always been good. Right, the year they didn't get to go to the bowl game. Was like the first time since bowls were allowed that Ohio State didn't go to a bowl. Whenever we had the bowl ban like 12 years ago or whatever it was. Ohio State didn't have a season with 7 losses for a century. But most of these other programs, like Michigan was losing to Toledo 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
The
like,
Saban example is the best one. Do that
Yeah,
one.
Saban was terrible at Michigan State and had one good year and got out of there, right? And then Alabama was terrible before he got there. The first year he was there, they lost to Louisiana Monroe at home, and he turned them into a Death Star. Miami stinks right now. They're getting a little bit better. But Miami at one point was the superpower. Florida State was the same way. Yeah, Miami under Schnellenberger and Jimmy Johnson, unbelievable. Miami, when Ohio State beat them in maybe the best game of football ever played in the 2002 National Championship, was everything every SEC team ever dreamed of being, right? This sport goes so up and down. The regions that are dominant change all the time, right? USC has been a program that one year is a national championship caliber team. The next year goes 4-8. This happens to so many teams. So we're sort of trying to pretend it won't keep happening, and we're trying to change the system. And I don't know if I really like that because you're losing what makes this sport special. If they turn themselves into just minor league football, eventually people will look at them like they're minor league, and you're not going to fill 105,000 seats in a horseshoe.
See, here's the issue with what you're saying, and I agree with you. I don't know if this is a proper cliche, but you're going to eventually have the tail wag the dog, because if you are going to the championship every year with 4 teams, you're going to have an advantage in recruiting then as that builds. And as you have the advantage in recruiting, which you already kind of have, the gap's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And once that happens, then you really are talking about 2 different sports. Maybe we already are doing that and we just don't know, and it's going to just manifest itself officially. But you are going towards a time when, look, this is just the facts. The Michigan-Ohio State game is not going to have the same juice that it had over the past 100-odd years or whatever it's been. And that's because when you play a game between two elite teams last every year and you're in a system where you can't lose, you basically set up like an individual rivalry championship game every year. So then you add in all the other ancillary emotional stuff that's grown over the years. But it started really based on talent and the need to go through the other. That's just not the case anymore, and we just saw that. So I think it was you, Bax, who made this example to me, and it was really kind of the one that crystallized it, in combination with a guy I talked to in the NFL all the time who told me before the season, get away from the idea of being undefeated. No football team that's that big with that many good players expects to go undefeated over 16 games. He's like, there's a reason Larry Zonka and Mercury Morris, God rest his soul, I think maybe both of them are passed, I don't know, pop the corks. You know what I'm saying? It's very, very rare. In the NFL, it's only happened once, and it was in the friggin' 70s, and they didn't even pass the ball at the time. So it's interesting, man. This really is the first time. Like, they've talked about stuff like this before, the superpowers moving on and stuff. But now it really does feel like it's for real. Give me an idea of your chances of you actually think this happening and maybe a timeline. So if Bax had to predict next year's playoff format, what would it be?
14 teams, 4 teams guaranteed from the Big Ten and the SEC each. They're going to push this through for next year. And this is what I call the Bama wah reaction, because Bama didn't get in. I know the people down south still can't wrap their heads around that somehow, even though Bama lost their bowl game. I think you're looking at this year, they're going to expand it by 2 teams. I think you're going to eliminate the automatic conference buys at the top of it. And I think you're going to have the Big Ten and SEC with 8 of the 14 guaranteed. And that's a minimum. You may have it where they get to 9 or 10 in some years, because you have to only guarantee the other 4 champions or 3 champions. That's it. So I think we're looking at that in the near term. I think we're already where the Ohio State-Michigan game, like, God bless its soul, it was an amazing experience. This past year alone, we've learned with all the conversation about Ryan Day's job status and winning a national championship despite losing to Michigan. I've said it for 3 months now, whether I like it or not, it's real. If the Pittsburgh Steelers win the Super Bowl and lose to the Cleveland Browns in the regular season, no one cares. We're getting to that point now where Ohio State won the national championship but lost to Michigan, and we're going to have to learn to not care as much about it. And it's just changed the whole ball game, because college football, if I could crystallize college football all the way up until this year, was you're more interested in your rival being more miserable than you are than winning anything, right? You're just happy that you beat those jackasses. Even in a place like Ohio State, we're like, well, we didn't win the national championship, but we beat Michigan. Ha, suck it, right? And now it's not like that anymore. It's just not like that anymore. The way, especially at the top of the sport, right? Maybe if you're a Bowling Green fan and you're really excited you beat Toledo, maybe that still carries. And I think what used to be college football is going to be seen more and more the further you get from the top of the heap, outside of the top 25, out of the big 2 leagues. But, I think we're going to have this current structure with 14 or whatever. And I think the Big Ten and SEC in about 5 years are going to realize we can just split off and make even more money and not have to share any of it. And I think let's call it 2031 is my guess at latest, whenever it's just you have the Super League and everybody else.
So it's interesting. I think one of the reasons what you're talking about is going to take place, one of the things the bowl system did that people don't take into account is a lot of teams finish the season with a win.
Yep.
And when it's your college team and you're doing the rah-rah, that's a good way to finish the season. You could go 8-4 and win the Sun Bowl and feel positive about momentum going into next year.
Momentum into next year, baby.
Right. So that's not really the case anymore. I mean, you may get some ancillary bowl stuff that you'll feel good about, but now the winner's going to be the winner. Everybody's going to lose. So come on now.
You're gonna have a lot more Neyland North seasons for places like Tennessee, where they're like, "Yeah, we got this great opportunity. It's gonna go amazing," and reality hits, and then everybody spends the whole offseason triple guessing.
Yeah, so that's going to be really interesting to watch. I don't put it this way. This is going to be over the next. Okay, here's where we'll leave it. Guess who's off the hot seat? Ryan Day. I get it. There are going to be some of you who, A, are still mad at Bax for calling for his job, and B, will not be happy until they beat Michigan. I get it. I want all those things. I want the second thing to happen for sure. That said, the point that Bax made that I was trying to make earlier and I forgot as I got on a tangent as I want to do. The Pittsburgh Steelers could lose twice to the Ravens and win the Super Bowl, and you literally will not even see it in the highlight video. Whether that should be the case or not, that's where we're going. So there's that. And guess who enters the hot seat now? Your boy Dan Lanning, your guy James Franklin. They are in hot water. I don't care what anyone tells me. As we get further along in the season here, and there's no Ryan Day low-hanging fruit for the media to go after, guess what they're going to do? Does that mean they're not going to go after somebody? Absolutely not. Someone's going to slide right into that spot. What's your thoughts on that?
Kalen DeBoer is the hottest seat in the country because he dared to go 10-3 at Alabama or whatever he did, the 9-4, whatever, right? So the Ryan Day thing, by the way, I'll say this ad nauseum forever. Bax, you wanted him to lose his job, and then they won a national championship. Okay, well, guess what, guys? The rules have changed. The old Ohio State rules, if you lost 4 in a row to Michigan, your ass was grass. There's no doubt about it, right? And the reality is I think for a lot of people, myself included, seeing this whole thing happen is a wake-up call that this is a new world we live in. I don't necessarily even like the new world, to be honest. I loved my season ending with we beat Michigan. Ha, 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 ha. Maybe we get to a bowl game where we have a chance to win a natty, but if not, let's go win the Fiesta Bowl. I actually loved that. I thought that was amazing, right?
It was amazing.
And we've lost something. We've definitely lost something here as a sport and as a fan base. I don't know if it's better long-term. You can certainly argue that with me. But the rules of the game have changed now. You want a coach like Ryan Day that's going to get you in the playoff every year and give you a chance to win it. And if you stumble once or twice along the way like he did, who cares, right? That's what we're into now, like it or not. And I don't necessarily even really like it. But from the presupposition of the old view, Ryan Day shouldn't have a job. From the new view, Ryan Day is the most untouchable coach in college football. And it's a very big swing, guys. And you're right. People who are on the hot seat now, it's going to be Bama because you didn't make the playoffs and you suck. Or it's going to be Dan Lanning. How could you lose to Ohio State when you already beat them? Even though history says that rematches always go the way of the loser of the first game. Literally, every time there's a big game. I did the research for that one before the Rose Bowl, by the way. It's so true. You're going to see like a guy like James Franklin now. There's no excuses. Like, oh, we lost one game, but we went 11-1. And how do you fire a guy that goes 11-1, right? He's like Bo Pelini on steroids right now at Penn State. Well, now you got to win when you get the opportunity. Why do you think he spent so much money on Jim Knowles? I mean, there's no excuses now for Franklin to be, the classic. So, like, I guess the best way I can put it is Brett Bielema at Wisconsin every year would win 10 games, no matter what. Now, if you looked at his schedule, he played like 3 games they might actually have a chance at losing before the bowl game, and they would lose 2 of them, and they would go 10-2 every year. The people are like, well, look how good of a coach Bielema is. Now, that ends with a playoff loss because your team's not good enough when you play the big dogs. You can't get away with that anymore. And it's going to be a lot harder for those kind of coaches to not get in more of a hot seat situation. So, and it sucks for the coaches because if you're good enough to get into the playoffs, then you better win. And if you're not good enough to get in the playoffs, then why aren't we in the playoffs? Literally, it's harder on coaches now in terms of pressure, I think. It's
also made it just very clear. So like you said about Wisconsin, they go 10-2 every year, but if they beat, Auburn in the Blue Bonnet Bowl, and I'm jesting, like you get to say, hey, we were 10-2, we're close to Ohio State and Penn State, we beat an SEC team, rah, rah. That's not going to happen anymore. I'm not sure if it's good or bad for the sport. Like I said, given my current choice of employment, I really, really only care if it's good for Ohio State, and it is. That said, I tried to tell them it's like selling real estate in Beverly Hills. Everything's good for Ohio State when it comes to college football because everybody wants a piece of them. You know who wants Ohio State in the playoffs as much as we do? Television networks. Okay. Yep. So there's never going to be a system that's set up to hurt Ohio State. Look, it's good to be king. Sorry.
Look at Indiana right now, Dan. Last year, if Indiana's helmet had a winged football helmet like Michigan, if Indiana's football helmet had the Oklahoma logo on the side, there would have been zero doubt that they should have been in the playoffs. People were still trying to talk them out of the playoffs, right? If that was Bama, they would have been 3 seats higher. It's still a factor. Brand names matter, man, right? So like Indiana doing what they did to get in, they deserve all the credit in the world for it. But they literally had to have a 1-loss best season in the history of their program to get in. It's going to be more and more blue blood, big name brands that get into this thing every year. It's going to be harder for those little guys to get in. And I think you're seeing the reaction to this right now of Bama not getting in. This is the SEC's tantrum, and they're choosing to do it.
This is Hollywood Hager bringing it down to the youth. We lost All Ohio Red at the King James Classic, but turned around and won the D1 AU National Championship. Which one do you think I will take? Yeah, the King James Classic, if I remember correctly, was in the beginning of the year too. Kind of like Daytona 500. They would start it out early because they knew half the AAU teams would go bankrupt. They want to cash in on them early. All right,
Yeah, right.
We digressed, and we will now call it a show. 41 minutes, so you guys got a minute and now almost 40 seconds of free content. How about that? So we appreciate Bax stopping by. Dave Biddle will be back next week with Bax, and I will get a break of some sort. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Have a good one.